Hey, welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new here. Today I'll be ranking Taylor Swift's albums. The first thing I thought of when I came back to this channel is that I need to do a top 10 or a top Taylor list. So I thought a good one to do would be my top 10 Taylor Swift albums. And it works out perfectly because currently, as I'm filming this, she has exactly 10 albums out right now. So it's already a top 10, but I will be ranking all of the albums she has out at this point of time. And I'm only going to be ranking all of the original albums. There will be no Taylor's version albums in this video because I don't think it's quite necessary. I just want to rank the original versions. And to give some context before I go into these rankings, what I view as a good album is an album that is consistently sonically cohesive all the way through. Each song stays on theme of what the concept of the album is. And I also base it a little on whether or not I have a lot of songs on that album that I absolutely love. And if I rank an album that you love on the low side of this ranking, don't take it personally, please. We all can have our opinions here. Just because I don't like an album that you love doesn't invalidate you liking that album. You can like that album. It's just me personally, I have some issues with that album and I'm going to voice my opinions on it because it's good for us to be nuanced here. So please, don't come at me if I rank your favorite album really low on this list. It is just my opinion. And with all that being said, let's get into the rankings and we'll start with my least favorite Taylor Swift album. So my least favorite Taylor Swift album isn't that much of an unpopular opinion actually, and that is Lover. Yes, I'm one of those that does not like Lover, unfortunately. So why am I not a fan of this album? There is more than one reason. Reason one being is that I feel like the track list is all over the place. I think sonically there is a lot going on in this album. It does, for the most part, stay in the pop genre, but there's a few songs that are like really slow, kind of acoustic. I'm thinking of Soon You Get Better, and some that are just like full on pop. One song like False God that is like a little bit R&B. It's just the genres are kind of all over the place on this album, which I'm not a fan of. I want an album to stay consistently cohesive in sound, and I feel like this album does not fall under that category. Let me give an example. In the track list, we have at track 11, London Boy, a very bubblegum pop song. Then we have Soon You'll Get Better, a very sad acoustic sounding song. Then it goes to False God, which, like I said, that song kind of has a little bit of an R&B feel to it. That is the most jarring transitions I've ever heard in an album ever. I'm not even kidding. It's too all over the place for me. I also feel like this album was so juvenile with some of its tracks. And this is not like one of Taylor's earlier albums. This is her 7th album, and I feel like this far along in her career, I want her to have more mature sounding songs. A lot of the songs on here, like Paper Rings, London Boy, Me, You Need to Calm Down, they all sound so juvenile. Like they sound like they could be on a children's movie soundtrack, and that's not really a good thing. It really isn't. And since this was the album that followed up Reputation, and that album was so dark and gritty and just edgy with its sound, and then you followed it up with an album with songs that sound so immature, wasn't a fan of it. I felt very disconnected from her during the Lover era, so much so that I was afraid that I was going to fall out of love with her music. I'm not even kidding. That's how much this album disappointed me. But I still held on, still waited for her next album, which her next album was great. That was Folklore, was a huge fan of that one, so I'm glad I didn't lose hope in her, but this album did not work for me. Not to say that there's not songs on here that I do love. I love Cruel Summer. Such a bop. I love The Archer. That's actually probably one of my, I want to say it's in my top 5 favorite Taylor Swift songs. I love The Archer so much. Daylight is great too. Death by a Thousand Cuts. Like, there's specific songs in here that I do love, but there's also so many tracks that I dislike really, really badly. Me takes the spot as the worst Taylor Swift song in my opinion. I have like a visceral reaction whenever I hear that song. It's like painful to listen to. I hate that song. I hate it so much, and it's so weird for me to say I hate a Taylor Swift song, but I strongly have a strong dislike for that song. And it's the lead single off this album, so that's another reason why this album is my least favorite. But yeah, those are all my reasons. I'm sorry if you love Lover, because I just dissed it for the past 5 minutes. Coming in at number 9, I might get some heat for this one. I might. And I'm sorry about that, because this album is pretty beloved in the fandom, and that is Red. Hear me out on this, okay? I have my reasons for disliking this one. I feel like this album as a whole is a hot mess. It's all over the place. So many of these tracks do not belong on the same album. That's like the only specific reason why I do not like this album as a whole. There are so many songs on this album that I do love. For example, I love State of Grace. That is probably, yeah, that is the best Taylor Swift opening song on an album ever. Absolutely. Treacherous is my favorite Taylor Swift song of all time, and that song is on this album. And I love Holy Ground as well. All Too Well, great song, of course, we all know. But sonically, this album does not work. Try listening to this album from beginning to end and dare to tell me that it is not pure chaos. We have pop songs on this album. We have country songs. We have an EDM song like I Knew You Were Trouble. We have singer-songwriter type songs. We have The Last Time, which is kind of an alternative type of song. It's all over the place, and it does not work at all. I also posted my rankings for Taylor Swift albums on my Instagram stories, and I had actually put Red higher on the list initially, just because, like I said, there's some of my favorite songs are on this album. But what changed my mind, why I knocked it down for this ranking on this video, is because I think it was yesterday, I was trying to decide what Taylor Swift album I wanted to put on. And I look at Red, and I just thought, you know what? I just have no desire, because I know it's just going to be chaotic. It's not going to make sense. It's not going to be a pleasant listen because it's just all over the place. I never have any desire to actually sit down and take in this album because it's just an experience that makes no sense. It's not a pleasant experience to listen to this album as a whole, front to back for me. So that's what makes it a very weak album for me. And it's why I understand why it did not win Album of the Year at the Grammys. I know a lot of people are like, Red deserved a Grammy. I'm one of those, and I feel like I'm the only one over here being like, I understand why it did not deserve a Grammy, because it was a hot mess. It makes no sense. It's a weak album as a whole because sonically it is not up to standard. Moving on to number 8, good news is my rants are probably over. It was just number 10 and 9 that I felt the most strongly about on why I don't really vibe with those albums. But going on from here, I either have albums that I thought were okay and ones that I absolutely love. So coming in at number 8, we have Fearless. So the reason I have this one so low in the rankings is because I just don't really reach for this one a lot. A lot of the tracks on this album don't stand out to me a whole ton. I honestly feel kind of bored when I listen to this album all the way through, which is a little harsh, but it's just the truth. And that's so weird to say because when I was getting into Taylor Swift, it was during the tail end of the Fearless era. Speak Now was just about to come out. So the only songs I had to listen to were from Fearless and Debut. And I remember listening to the most songs from Fearless. So strangely enough, I became a Taylor Swift fan because of Fearless. But she's come out with so many better albums since then that this one is just not one I reach for a lot. Like, I never have a great desire to listen to it all the way through. Of course, there are songs I love on here. Love Story is one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs, and it is the lead single off this album, which is pretty cool because generally I don't tend to love her lead singles as much as her deep cuts, but Love Story is one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs. I mean, it's so iconic. I also love Change as well, and The Way I Loved You, but there's other songs on here where I'm like, I just I never listen to those. I never have a strong desire to listen to them. So yeah, this one is just okay. I don't strongly dislike it. I think in terms of sound, it is very consistent. I mean, it's a pure country album for sure, with a little bit of pop mixed in there. Even though there's two genres going on in this album, they do mix very well. Coming in at number 7 is Debut. Like Fearless, I just don't reach for this one enough when I want to listen to a Taylor Swift album all the way through. And I'm pretty sure it's because I'm just not a huge fan of country. That's kind of why I also don't listen to Fearless as much, is because Debut and Fearless really focus heavy on the country, and I'm just not a huge fan of country, so a lot of times I just don't have a desire to listen to this one. Despite that though, I can appreciate this album for it being Taylor's first album. This is where she started, and I can appreciate it for that, but I just don't have a desire to listen to it all that much. Of course, it has some great tracks on it, like Cold As You. Love that song, one of my favorite Taylor songs for sure. Stay Beautiful and Mary's Song, such great cute songs on here, but for an album as a whole, I just don't put it on enough. At number 6 is Evermore. I have seen some opinions that think that Evermore is better than Folklore, and that's great. If you think it's better than Folklore, like, all the power to you. But I'm with the majority that thinks Folklore is definitely better than Evermore. For me, the middle of this album starts to sag for me. I feel like from Happiness to Cowboy Like Me, it starts to feel a little slow. The beginning and end of this album are great, but the middle has some tracks that I just don't care for a whole lot. So that's the main reason why I don't vibe with Evermore as much as other albums. But I do love the sound of a lot of these tracks. Her indie folk phase with both Folklore and Evermore is one of the best genres she has ever done. So I can appreciate Evermore for that, but there are a few tracks, like I said, that I'm just not a huge fan of that are on this album. My favorites though, Champagne Problems, Gold Rush. Gold Rush is probably my favorite from this album. Long Story Short. So there are some good ones, of course, but there are other tracks in here that I'm just like, eh. None that I strongly hate, but are just like meh, that I don't listen to enough. I feel like those tracks, if you are curious, Happiness, it's kind of boring. Sorry, it sounds really boring. Dorothea is a little too campy for me. Ivy, have never been a huge fan of because I hate the theme of cheating so much. So I do not vibe with the theme of Ivy whatsoever. It bothers me, honestly. But there are a lot of good things about this album too. A lot of great songs on it, of course. At number 5, I did not expect to rank this album only in the middle. I thought I loved it more, but I found that I loved other albums by her a lot more. So this one sadly is at number 5, which kind of pains me to put it here, but that is Midnights. I was obsessed with Midnights. I almost said last year, but it's 2024 now. About a year and a half ago when it came out in 2022. Was obsessed to the point where I'm like, oh, I think this is going to be my new favorite Taylor Swift album. But as time has passed, I don't love it as much as I did when it first came out. It just kind of like weared off, and I'm like, no, there are still other albums from her that I love more. But it's still good that Midnights is just at the middle. That means it was good. We're getting to the point in my rankings where all these albums that I'm going to talk about now were all good or amazing, and Midnights is one of those. This was such a solid pop album. Sonically, it was very cohesive. I love the chill pop vibe this album has. I love the aesthetic. Funnily enough, I thought the sound aesthetic of this album was going to be 70s inspired because the photo shoot is so 70s inspired, but it's actually just a modern pop album. So that was surprising. My favorite tracks have to be Maroon. That's definitely my favorite song off this album. You're on Your Own, Kid. Vigilante Shit. So, that song was so mind-blowing when I first heard it. Labyrinth, Karma, Mastermind, Question, Midnight Rain. There are so many songs on this album that I love. From the 3 a.m. tracks, I love The Great War, Would've, Could've, Should've, Glitch. It's so weird that there's so many tracks on here that I love, but I only ranked it in the middle. I mean, that goes to show how much I love my top 4, which you'll see. Coming in at number 4, we have Reputation. I feel like this one is ranked high also because when this album came out, it was such a cultural reset. It was such a moment because this was her comeback album after being MIA for a whole year, pretty much like 2 years, no, 3 years, because it had been 3 years since 1989 had come out. I mean, this album is just iconic for that reason, but also the sound of it is everything. This is a pop album, primarily pop, but when I think of this album, I just think of how monumental and amazing the production is. There's so many strong synths in a lot of these tracks that make these songs so memorable. My favorite tracks, I Did Something Bad, Delicate, Look What You Made Me Do, which is the lead single off this album, so it's like amazing that I love that song so much because it's the lead single. Getaway Car, King of My Heart, This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, Dress, one of my favorite Taylor Swift songs, so many great songs. I feel like this album as a whole is so unique because I feel like she will never have a consistent production as she did with this album ever again. It is so specific to this album in terms of its production. Love Reputation, I feel like it's underrated, honestly. Now we're getting into my top three. Coming in at number 3 is Folklore. Like I said earlier, I loved her indie folk era that she had with Folklore and Evermore. It was a genre that I did not expect from her, but it worked so well with her voice. She just nailed this album. Lyrically, this is her best album. She produced some of the most beautiful, thought-provoking, well-crafted lyrics in all of her discography, for sure. When I think of this album, I immediately think of how amazing the lyrics are. With Reputation, like I said, I love that album more for the production, but with Folklore, I love this album specifically for its lyrics. My favorite songs, Cardigan, hits me on such a personal level. That's why I love it so much. The Last Great American Dynasty, Exile, My Tears Ricochet, Mirrorball, This Is Me Trying, Illicit Affairs, Epiphany. Epiphany is so underrated. I'm one of those that love it. I know a lot of people don't. I love it so much. Betty, The Lakes, so many good tracks. I have to say, The Lakes is one of her most beautifully written songs ever. This is just such a solid album. I was blown away when it was released because it was a surprise release, as we know. And I have to say, I listen to this album all the time from beginning to end. It is such a pleasant experience. If you want to put on a very chill album, this is the one to go to because all these songs are just so peaceful. It'll put you in a cozy mood. That's the vibe this album has, and I love it. Coming in at number 2, I did not expect to put this album so high on the list as my second favorite Taylor Swift album, but it only makes sense after I thought about it for a while. That is 1989. It's her most iconic album ever, in my opinion. This album opened so many doors for her. This was her first ever pop album, and it was just a hit with me. I was very curious before this album came out and when she announced it on how a full pop album from Taylor Swift would go, and she nailed it completely. I feel like pop was her calling. She did the country thing, and that was good. I mean, she's great as a country singer too, but she works so well as a pop artist, and so I'm glad she went this route. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. This is her best album sonically. The sound of this album is so memorable, so consistent all the way through. It is an 80s pop inspired album, and you can hear that in every single one of these tracks. Some of the songs on this album give me literal chills when I hear them because the production is that insane and that incredible. Specifically, Out of the Woods, in terms of production, that is her best produced song ever. Absolutely. Like, all credit to Jack Antonoff. He nailed the production on that song. The synths, the 80s inspired synths on these tracks make me feel a sort of way when I hear them. They're just that incredible. My favorite tracks, Blank Space. I mean, how could it not? Blank Space was a moment. Out of the Woods, All You Had to Do Was Stay, I Wish You Would is my absolute favorite from this album. So underrated. Wildest Dreams, This Love, Clean, nothing but good things for 1989. It was one of her best eras, absolutely. And here we go. My favorite Taylor Swift album is Speak Now. This has remained my favorite Taylor Swift album since it came out in 2010. Like I had said earlier, I got into Taylor Swift because of Fearless and Debut, but Speak Now made me remain a fan for all these years. I remember this being the very first album that I listened to all the way through without skipping, because before I was young, so I didn't really value albums as a whole yet. I would only listen to CDs just to get to my favorite song. So I would skip around, get to my favorite song, and then not listen to any other songs on the album. Speak Now was the first album where I listened to an album from beginning to end and never skipped a song, and I was like, wait, I love every single song on this album. I would listen to this album as a whole all the way through over and over and over again and never get tired of it, and I still am that way. This album just holds such a special place in my heart because it is what brought me into this fandom, made me stay a fan. I owe so much to this album because of that. For that reason, this album is just so sentimental to me because it made me a Taylor Swift fan. So that's also why it's in my #1 spot on this list, but also because the tracks on this album are phenomenal. In terms of sound, it's very consistent, and I do absolutely love the theme this album has, that you should say what you want to say to someone if you really mean it, if it's important, because it may be your only chance to say that in this moment. It is the moment. And that's why she says, I don't think you should wait, I think you should speak now. And it's so, so true. Without a doubt, this album, in terms of theme, is my favorite theme that she's ever had in any of her albums. I just love Speak Now. My favorite tracks, Mine, which is the lead single off this one, which is amazing, Sparks Fly, Speak Now, Dear John, The Story of Us, Enchanted, of course, Innocent, Haunted, Long Live. Pretty much all of these tracks, honestly, I know I skipped some, but all of these songs are incredible. They're all songs I've listened to over and over again. Such a solid album. It'll be hard for any of her future albums to beat this one. None of her albums that have come out after Speak Now have beaten it for me. It might just always remain my favorite album, honestly. Nothing's gonna beat it. So that was my rankings of all of Taylor Swift's albums. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what is your favorite Taylor Swift album, or rank all of her albums in the comments if you'd like to. I'd be really interested to know your rankings. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll be back really soon. Bye!